Good afternoon. Thank you.
We'll see.
Well, hello. Welcome to the afternoon session. I am Dr. Darrell Brown. I'm a clinical associate professor here in the Kelley School of Business. I mainly teach international business. So I was listening very intently this morning to all the presentation and the panelists. And when I was hearing Ashley talk about infrastructure and things in Africa, I was saying, that's it. I've had the opportunity to go to Ghana 5 times over the last 15 years, and I've been all over Ghana. That's the one country in Africa that I've been and know the most. And every time I've gone, I've just impressed with not only the Ghanaian people and how they're doing business in Africa, in Ghana, but also keep wondering if they could ever improve that infrastructure, if they could ever make the roads better, because they have a lot of mud roads, and man, you could get the goods and services around quicker if you could have infrastructure like we have in the U.S. So I'm hoping that as we go into the next 10, 20 years and all of you are doing business in Africa, that certainly infrastructure gets improved so much so that it makes it a lot easier to get their goods and services around in each country. So I'd like to introduce the panel today for this afternoon. And as I tell my students when I get up in front of class and introduce myself, then I tell the class, well, the class is about you and not me. So I'm going to introduce them and do like I do in class and get out the way. So I'm going to introduce all 3 of them, and then they're going to have sort of an opening statement remarks, and then we'll sort of go from there and get questions later on down the road. So I'd first like to introduce the person who is not here, and that is George Sauer. And he would like to definitely apologize for not being here. He actually is stuck in Ghana at the moment. So he sends his apologies and regrets that he's missing this session and hopes that everybody will forgive him for not being here. So the first I'd like to introduce is Dr. Toby Malachi, and he is the founder and chairman of the Global Chief Executive of Malachi Group Worldwide. Dr. Malachi is also called the go-to guy by his contemporaries. He is recognized internationally in a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, global business leader. He's a trade expert, advisor, and global business diplomat to world leaders. He also does a lot in the private sector in terms of global business and investment groups and some of the world's most prestigious businesses and governments. And Dr. Malachi and I had a chance to meet earlier this morning, and I actually did my undergrad at General Motors Institute in Flint, Michigan. He actually worked for General Motors and did a few classes there, so we got a chance to sort of talk about the old days in GMI. Second person I'd like to introduce is David Ketchum. He is the president and founder of Mission Resource International. He began to acquire a love for Africa when he and his wife Sue went on their first mission trip in 1984. And during those years when David owned and managed several small businesses, he spent time overseas involved with mission ministries. And the third person on our panel is Jimmy Betcher, and he is the director and corporate engagement partner in Food Solutions. He leads corporate-facing corporations for Partners in Food Solutions. It's a growing consortium of world-class food companies, dealing with companies like General Mills, Cargill, Hershey's, DSM, and Ardent Mills. They use their resources and employee skills to strengthen entrepreneurial food companies in Africa with the goal of improving food security, nutrition, and economic development. And so I now let the panel turn it over to the panel. Thank you, guys.
Good afternoon. Bonsoir. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for that overly generous introduction. I'll just open with just a few words, but I was thinking something. I'm kind of you get to know me a little bit. I kind of like to keep things kind of loose and flying, and I was thinking about Africa, and there was a lion that woke up one morning, and the lion decided, you know what, I'm king of the jungle, and I'm going to go out here and I'm going to prove it in my kingdom that I'm king of the jungle. So the lion goes through the jungle. He comes upon a rhinoceros. Rhinoceros, who's king of the jungle? Rhinoceros says, oh my God, there's that lion again. You are Mr. Lion. You are Mr. Lion. Yeah, don't you forget about it. Well, the lion's feeling proud. He goes through the jungle a little bit more, and he comes across the monkeys. The monkey said, oh my God, here comes that crazy lion. Lion, who's king of the jungle? You are, Mr. Lion, you are. Yeah, that's right. Don't you forget it. The lion goes a little deeper in the jungle and comes across an elephant. Elephant, who's king of the jungle? The elephant, in an uproar and a rage, raises his trunk up. He picks up the lion. He throws the lion down. He throws him back and forth. He jumps down the lion's throat. He does a tap dance on the lion's tonsils. He comes back out and throws the lion down. And the lion, dazed and amazed, says, that's okay, Mr. Elephant, if you forgot who's king of the jungle. So doing business in Africa, you have to remember who's king of the jungle. And my first time in going to Africa, I took that lesson that Malachi Group Worldwide, Dr. Toby Malachi was not king of the jungle. My first entree into Africa was Roots Kuna Kente, because my first name's Toby. And so I figured, like, okay, here we go. And I went, Patricia, my first time in Africa was to Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan. And going through, and I don't speak French, but I learned real quick some things. But going to the airport and making my trade out to a business conference, and I like what Elliot said, your first deal might not be your winning deal. And he's absolutely correct on that. But I noticed in the airport, there was this lady, and she looked like, she's an African lady, I do that, but she looked like a business. The people saw her like a homeless lady. The way she was dressed, mismatched clothes, wearing her garb. And the way I'm raised, I don't make fun of people, poke fun of people, because you just don't. And so I came very protective of this lady. And I said, ma'am, and go with me. And they were giving her a hard time with all her big bags. And we got together and sat on the plane. But I sat in business class, and this lady sat in business class. Actually, she sat right beside me. So we talked. It came down, and she spoke French. The flight attendant did the same thing. And this didn't treat her well. I said, well, she'll have the same thing. She'll have something different. Well, my first trip into Africa, 1996, was in Dakar. And so we're going to be here just for a little while, synagogue. And about this time comes this Mercedes, these military jeeps, these flags, and these sirens rushing coming in. And this lady was the mother of the ambassador. You're not the king in Africa. And so he came on the plane, he thanked me, and he went on. I went on the conference in Cote d'Ivoire. He had to be speaking at the conference, mentioned me at the conference, gave me, the cultural acceptance of things that go on. And and you learn culture real quick, and that is when they put your arm hold you, that's a sign of endearment. And so that was my entree into Africa and to some of the other things I will go into in the question and answer period. But we did not get a deal with Petrochem, but I learned an awful lot at that time. And since then, my company's in over 70 countries around the world. I worked on AGOA, I was telling Ashley, about 80% of our free trade agreements. This is my fourth White House that I'm trying to advise on trade agreements. And God has just blessed me in so many ways, but I'll save a lot for question and answers and how we became a success in Africa. With an office in Pretoria and the major transactions that we have done in Angola.
Well, my name's Dave Ketchum. I'm with Mission Resource International. I am bullish on Africa. A few years ago, I was here at IUPUI, and there was a conference being held about Africa, and they were mostly academics that had been trained here in America, mostly here in Indianapolis, and that was their theme. We want to do business with Americans, and I never forgot that. And today we've been working in Africa for over 15 years. Our first trip in '84 was very enlightening. I'd been in the logistics trucking industry most of my life, and at that point, it just sold a business and my wife and I had no children. It was an opportunity to see a place where we'd never seen before. But I was just absolutely taken back by the beauty, by the hospitality, by just Africa in general. We were in Zaire at the time, in Kenya. Later on in 1987, I was fortunate to go to Senegal as well. The food there was very, very good. Since that time, and later in 87, I met my longtime friend, Enoch Nyador. And Enoch was going to be here today, but he saw Kelly School and he ended up in Bloomington. But I was really looking forward to introducing him to you today. As Elliot also mentioned, and several of the other people, having the right partner or partners is the key. And he's been the kind of partner that I've been able to trust through all these years. We're not only business partners, but we're great friends. He's the chairman of our NGO in Ghana. Over the last 13 years, we've helped start over 100 small businesses in Ghana. We begin with sitting down with them and helping them write their business plans and walking the whole process. And we still walk the process with them 10 years later. It's not just about loaning the money, but that relationship. And we have some of the businesses that have done well enough that they're doing over $1 million a year in sales, and they're still in conversations with us. So it's not about just making the money. It's about the relationships, and then we are a faith-based organization, so it's not just about the dollars and cents as well. It's about improving the quality of life of those with whom we work. And as you spend time in Africa, you learn that you're not just doing business with an individual or one particular family. A lot of times, there's such extended families that are involved, and trying to get a handle on all that is very important. Where I am right now, and a lot of my thinking is that there's a lot of issues on logistics and energy and ways to utilize a lot of the experience that I have had here in the United States that we've never been able to take to the starting line yet. That's one of the reasons I'm so bullish. But again, it's great to be here. I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to being able to answer some of your questions as we go forward. Thanks.
So my name is Jimmy Betcher, and I'm the Director of Corporate Engagement at a company called Partners in Food Solutions. So PFS is a growing consortium of some of the world's leading food and ag multinationals. So it was started by General Mills, but includes Cargill, Hershey, Ardent Mills, Bueller, and DSM. But it's, like I said, a growing consortium of some of the world's leading food multinationals that are looking to share expertise, resources, and capabilities with small, growing entrepreneurial food companies in Africa. It started with a really interesting discussion, though. So Ken Powell, who's the outgoing CEO of General Mills right now, is about to retire. He was a brand new CEO at General Mills, and he did what lots of brand new multinational CEOs do. And he went to Davos, and where lots of things, there's a lot of talking and not a lot of doing. But so Kofi Annan at that time this was 8 years ago, was the outgoing UN Secretary General, and they caught up over a cocktail hour talking about food insecurity in Africa. And Kofi figured out that Ken was the CEO of one of the world's leading food companies, and was like, what are you doing about food insecurity in Africa? Ken said, good question, I don't know. Most CEOs probably would have said, drink please. But Ken was wired in the right way to come back and put together a team and figure out what General Mills could do to build up the capacity of the food sector in Africa. And a couple lightning bolt moments happened really, really early on. One was a realization that Lots of efforts were being done to develop agriculture in Africa, so improve the quality of inputs, strengthen extension, improve seed quality, all those things to help farmers produce more food. But if there's no one in the middle of the value chain, food companies, food processors, to purchase what these smallholder farmers are producing, then what's the point? So if you could help strengthen food processors, create more jobs, you could strengthen the middle of the value chain, create more demand for smallholder farmers while also helping deliver more nutritious food to feed African markets. And then the second realization was that General Mills, their R&D organization was already centralized. So they were already providing remote technical assistance to their operations all over the world. So what's to say that they couldn't provide remote technical assistance to companies in Africa as well, to help build up capacity, help them address key business challenges, business strategy problems, technical challenges with their operations, developing new products, et cetera. So fast forward to today, we have 6 corporate partners and work in 8 countries all over Africa, working with 200 different clients, small food companies, growing food companies, some who've reached some scale, millions of dollars in revenue, but essentially, it still to this day is working with food companies that are delivering nutritious products to African consumers. So dairies, flour mills, things like that. So for me, it's been an exciting opportunity to connect my previous field experience living in Uganda for a couple years with also my corporate experience having been at Cummins. So that's kind of what PFS does, but I'll share some of the best advice that I got when I first went to Africa, which I think applies to spending time in emerging markets or different cultures more broadly, but certainly applies in the business context as well. So I first went to East Africa, Uganda, as an undergraduate student, 11 plus years ago, and came in bright-eyed, wanting to change the world, thinking I was going to have this massive impact in a summer internship in Uganda. And I met a person that had spent, an American, but a person who had spent about 30 of the last 40 years in Uganda, and who tempered those expectations in a very healthy way. But he said, whatever you do, Jimmy, and bring your passion, bring that ambition, but at the same time, bring an approach of humility and a willingness to learn in every interaction that you have. So be it from the CEO of a company that you might be working with here in Uganda, all the way down to a woman selling bananas on the side of the street, because you can learn just as much. And so I've tried to have that shape my own business and interpersonal interactions in Africa and other parts of the world, and it's guidance that has definitely stayed true and been very, very valuable for me. But I think we're happy to answer whatever questions that you guys might have.
All right, thank you guys for those introductions. So if you don't mind, I'll ask the first question, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. Because I'm interested in knowing what type of, when you're looking at the cultural norms of doing business in Africa, kind of how do you get started in terms of introductions, in terms of business attire, in terms of communication?
Great question. I also happen to be the vice chairman of the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service, U.S. Department of Commerce, Indiana District Export Council, actually referred to us this morning. That was a great place to start to get some background on, we have a saying, go before you know, and so it's a good place to start to get some information, some ideas, some thoughts, why you want to go. Elliot mentioned this morning, manage your expectations, because be honest with you, when you thought of Africa, my passion was diamonds and gold, lots and lots of money. And so I want to get a piece of that. But I did my homework on dress. I'm a business person like you are in the room, and so wore my suit and tie. I did not try to be anything that I was not, because as I said, I'm not the king of the jungle in that environment there. And so how we got started, we met somebody actually here in the United States at a conference, invited me over, and I got in a plane and I went over and learned how to say please and thank you. If it's common sense, then why isn't it common practice? That led to other things. A lot of talk's been about partnerships and relationships. Well, we got involved in collaborations, but there's two things I'd like to say about collaborations. Collaborations comes in two types. There is the relationship part of a collaboration, and then there's the partnership part of a collaboration. And yes, you need both and have a successful deal, but the relationship side of collaboration is the transformation part, where you evolve and you talk and you go out for dinner and you continue to build on, and families, and on and on and on. People forget that, but they confuse that with partnership. And a lot of companies will do that. Well, they're our strategic partner, or they're our partners at. Well, partners in our business as World Trade Advisors, partners, the term for that collaboration is transactional. So it's important that you understand the relationship side of the business deal or the partnership side of the business deal, and then you work towards that very, very slowly. So that's how we did it on the entree growing in, and I'll get more detail as questions warranted.
Well, I totally agree with what you said, Toby. I just think that when I'm in an African culture, I'm the one that's the guest. And not only am I the guest, but their culture is much more formal than ours, and just understanding the norms of how you shake hands and how you honor the elders, and how you take your time in developing a conversation, and in using your friend or your contact to work through them and honor that whole thing, because their conversations aren't nearly as direct, and as you share and talk with them, you need not just necessarily yes and no answers. There need to be opportunities for them to kind of be in the gray area, especially initially. So again, it's about that relationship, but then as a business person, you have your goals and things you're trying to accomplish. You just need to be a little softer pedaling as you go in.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with the comments on, the real critical aspect of relationship building and taking your time, and the formal nature of society and particularly business there. Like any meeting, it's really, really critical to go through all the formal introductions and recognitions of every single person's title. And at any meeting or public event, I mean, introductions could take 20 minutes or an hour, depending on it. But it's really important that you recognize the status of people and take time to acknowledge their role and really build up trust. And relationships take years to build. And for the most part, people are relatively conflict averse, so they don't like. And it varies obviously quite a bit, market to market, region to region. But at least East Africa, that I know a bit better, certainly like a Ugandan wouldn't ever tell me something that I didn't want to hear to my face for the most part. And it takes time and trust and relationships over a very long period of time before they might actually tell you, no, that's actually 100% wrong. And so they're not going to be as direct as an American or a European might be. Attire is really, really critical. I was always incredibly impressed. So depending on wet season or dry season, you have tons of dust or tons of mud around, and Ugandan men's shoes are always perfectly clean. And I don't know what the trick is, because I would like to know the trick, but you're judged based on how clean your shoes are, 100%. Couple other little anecdotes. It depends. Professional business people, for the most part, are fairly timely, but timeliness can be a challenge, and sometimes there's different workarounds as well. Like when I lived in Uganda, I was working, supporting a wide range of entrepreneurs, like recognizing that they often knew exactly the solutions that they needed to grow their business. They just lacked sometimes the resources, and so I was like a conduit to some resources to help them do what they were already doing better. But so we set up a training for these really impressive Ugandan women, and so we brought in the head of the Uganda Women's Entrepreneurship Association to do a training. But if you would have just set up the training, they probably would have, and set the time at noon, they probably would have shown up at 4. But if you say lunch will be served from 12 to 1 and no point afterwards, then suddenly everyone's going to show up on time. So it's learning, some of the little cultural nuances. And then the last little anecdote I would share is the same guy that gave me that great advice when I first arrived. He's going back and forth between East Africa and U.S. on, at least once or twice a year. And so every time he'd come back to the U.S., everyone would remark, "Oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight, you look fantastic," etc. He would eat tons of pizza and burgers and have a couple beverages while he's back here in the U.S., put on maybe 10 or 15 pounds. He goes back to Kenya or Uganda, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, you look fantastic, you're fat, you look wonderful, you're healthy," etc. So particularly for women, being called fat might be a little off-putting, but it's meant as you look healthy, or it's an expression of wealth or status as well. So a couple little nuggets.
Thank you, guys. Anybody else have a question?
So in the business world, we tend to, I think, kind of get into a silo. We talk about business, but in emerging economies, especially here in the U.S., business does business with businesses. All the other stuff is kind of tangential to that. In emerging economies in Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, the ecosystem in those communities plays such a large part of the decision-making process. It's not just about the business-to-business conversation, but it's about the NGOs, it's about the government, it's about the community, it's about the village elders, it's about all of those things. So any advice on how someone can navigate the difference between, business-to-business conversations to business to, an ecosystem conversation for success?
Good question.
Great question, LaVon. I'm going to pass it over to in America, we have a tendency in American business, you're right, just to get down to business and just talk about business. How can we do? And our first words are, well, what do you do? What's your business? And that can be quite insulting. And if you notice something, I did not go to Africa as a black man when a dashiki said, "What's up, brother?" If you notice that. And I do that because I would insult them. And I found out something culturally about that, and actually mentioned a little bit about this morning, apartheid and lingering effects of apartheid. So I went there with my ears wide open, my eyes wide open, and my mouth shut. And I wanted to learn. Now, I'm from a small town in Indiana, so I was raised by the elders from the South. And on the South, you were taught to do what? Respect your elders. If you didn't, you got smacked down. And you got smacked down those days. And so some of the cultures I found seem to overlap kind of naturally once I kind of observe. I have a saying, I see you with my ears. And so I just went back and just learn and observe, watch the little intricacies of the personality, the movements, the body language. Who you might think is in charge may not be the person that's in charge, and you'll later get yourself in trouble on that. So I've learned to kind of just to take the power of observation and to listen And to be honest with you, I learned a lot of that from the Japanese as well when I was at General Motors Corporation. They wanted to know more about family and relationships. And so I took my family's roots from the South and then took that same behavior over to Africa. And I literally had a ball. I was made a chief in Ghana and I spoke at a think tank on corporate governance for SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises. And if you want to have something that will move you, if you know you've done it right, to have 400 African leaders, think tanks, professors, PhDs, leaders of international business institutes and colleges such as CIBER, and I'm proud I'm on the CIBER board of advisors, sing to you in a melody that you never heard before that brings tears to your eyes, then you know you're making an impact in some kind of way. And then you start to develop what Jimmy talked about, that trust that's in a little further.
Yeah, everything is so integrated. You would never begin a conversation without asking the person you're with about how they are, how their family is, by name if you possibly can. And then again, we have to take the lead from our partners there. And I'm not saying I've never overstepped that boundary because I have, but you have to rely on them and trust them, and they will guide you through who's the important person to talk to on this particular area, and how to navigate it in a way that is honoring. And I just think it sounds very, very simple. It's not, but that's how we have to go through and do things, because it's all integrated. It's all in the same puddle.
Yeah, I would echo both of their comments. Having a local that understands local market context, local cultural norms is really, really critical. In every market that we're in, we have local field staff that can tap into their local expertise and connections, et cetera. When I was at Cummins, we would fight tooth and nail over people that were locals but had been either educated here in the U.S. or had spent time working for like an American multinational, because you could bridge both cultural worlds. But Cummins fought with every other big multinational, and oftentimes lost as well. So it's a kind of a small pool of people that could live in both worlds. But on the ecosystem point as well, I mean, I think it's really, really critical to know and understand what role you play. Like, particularly in an absence of strong government institutions, strong infrastructure, et cetera, there's a lot of diverse players that are stepping into that void. And so, for example, for us, we know we provide technical assistance to entrepreneurs. So we might connect a snack food company that's delivering a healthy honey-based snack in Kenya with a world-class consumer marketer from General Mills who can help them better market their projects. We might connect an oil refining business food oil refining business in Ghana with oil manufacturing expert from Cargill, et cetera. But our recommendations are only as good as how much capital or finance is available to implement those recommendations. So we know we provide pretty solid world-class expertise from our corporate partners, but we need to create partnerships with local financial institutions to bring the finance as well. And that's just two pieces of it. But we've been working closely with a lot of impact investors that are providing finance at below market rates to help grow food and agribusinesses in Africa, but recognizing there's other pieces of the ecosystem that's needed to create an environment supportive of entrepreneurs as well. So we're always looking for more kind of ecosystem support providers and other partnerships that we can collaborate on.
I just want to kind of echo their thing about relationships. I know the first time I went to Ghana, the people in Ghana, you're given your name based upon the day of the week that you were born. So I was born on a Sunday, so my name was Kwame. So when I first went over there, introduced myself, I'm Kwame Brown. Sounds strange to me, but made a big impact on people. Anybody else got a question? Other question?
I'm just wondering, what's the process of cutting deals? I originally came from China, and quite often we Americans think we work so much, work around and work through, and then you just don't cut the deal. How about American? Does it take a long time, or quickly they cut the deal? Thank you.
Thank you, Waylon. Waylon's the president of the Global Chamber here in Indianapolis. We're deal makers, and we were involved in cross-border deals all the time, deal flows. It does take time. Someone mentioned that this morning and throughout the day. It does take time to cut deal. We're impatient. Americans, we want it right now, and sometimes we think we're smarter than other people around the world, and we're really not. Like I said, we're not the king of their jungle they're in. So it takes a little time, to cut the deal because there's many people involved in the deal. I'll go ahead and put this out there. There's corruptions involved in the deal because this is the cousin to that uncle, or whatever. And there's a little thing called the Foreign Corruption Practice Act. And in the last few years, ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you more Americans have gone to prison paying bribes or extra payments because they're trying to get a deal done fast. And, African businesses are no different than other businesses. If they see an opportunity, they will seize an opportunity. But emptor caveat, buyer beware. But it takes a while. We've had more deals die on us at the gate going in than I can shake a stick at. But we did our second deals with Sasso, a large coal company, and it took time to do that. And there's an acronym that I use on deals. Sometimes you got to be careful of. I don't know if it's appropriate to use the word in here or not. So I won't say it since it's going to be taped. But it's an acronym where the potential party you want to do business with will show high interest in your deal, and then just stops. And you can't find anybody. And so you got to be careful not to send money ahead or say it's going to show your good faith. We need $10,000 or $30,000 or $50,000. Why it's intriguing, it's enticing, and it's great, and it's fantastic because you want to get the deal done. You get caught up in the moment of things. You soon begin to hear the horror stories that take place. And I will tell you, there are horror stories. Has Malachi Group worldwide been caught up in a horror story? Yes, we have. It took us 2 years to litigate it and to get out of it. The same thing has happened to Cummins, and the same thing has happened to Dow Agri here in Indianapolis. So I raise that point, whether you're an SME like we are, or whether you're a large corporation, it makes no difference with your assets. You got to be careful, and so we were fortunate that in that regard. However, on deal making, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So it's keen that you're there, but it's keen that you manage your expectations and not get caught up in it. And again, our way of doing business, you're Chinese and you know this better than anybody, is far different than other cultural ways of doing business. So I go back to that know before you go. And we use an instrument in Malachi Group Worldwide called PREP. PREP is potential risk for export profitability. Potential risk for export profitability. And we do that, and we'll come in and assess complete company's operations from down to above. We'll do all the information we need, get it, we'll bring the people together, we'll bring the leadership, but not just the leadership of the company. We'll go down to make sure there's a buy-in in that company on wanting to go to Africa. Because what you can have on deal making, and I found this out to be true too, not everybody may not be as culturally generous or want to do business with someone that may have a different skin tone color. And when we run into that, but the smiles and the welcoming, like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. But you have to be it's a landmine. And it takes a lot of years to figure that out. And unless you go through it, you just kind of think like, nah, yeah, it's the real deal. And so it can cost you some money, but the key thing is, remember, on deal making, I spoke about this at a major conference here on the 18th, is do deep due diligence. You can never do enough due diligence. And if you forget how to do diligence again. Because as the two gentlemen mentioned right here, you don't necessarily who you're talking to, who may eventually be the person you want to talk to, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 persons down, and may not even be in the country. And then understand that it takes some back office operations to understand on how to do deals. If it was that easy, everybody'd be a trillionaire. And so from that standpoint, what I learned at Harvard or General Motors, or I'm an IUPUI grad here, that you take that, kind of throw it out the window because a lot of times it's just not applicable.
Yeah, I just want to agree with everything that you've said, but if you're going to do something that's dishonest, then there's always the next person, the next generation that's going to want his piece of that to be quiet or so forth. So if you work through your national partner and his way of doing things and his relationships, and we just were involved in a real estate transaction that ended up, from the time we began to the time we got the final title deed, was 5 years. We could have maybe done it more quickly than that, but we aren't looking over our shoulder at this point either. So, it's hard for us to understand because you're not dealing with clear titles and deeds like we have here in the United States. There was a book written several years ago called The Mystery of Capital, and that book's very enlightening. And there was another book I remember reading called The Locust Effect, and how the level of justice that we take for granted here in the United States doesn't exist. He who has the money controls everything, and you don't have the justice system. So those are a couple good reads that can help you as you begin this process.
Yeah, I think I would agree generally with pretty much everything that my colleagues stated, and it just takes time. And the one thing I would echo, particularly from Dr. Toby, is sometimes Americans take a bit of a kind of a patronizing, we think we're smarter than attitude into some of this, and it doesn't play well. And the Chinese in particular have been fairly successful in terms of business dealings in Africa by viewing Africans as partners and collaborators and equals, as opposed to this patronizing attitude that a lot of Americans have taken.
Can I say just a couple of things here real quick?
You guys talk right into the microphone.
All right, talk. Can you hear me? Hey, my Melvin Franklin voice of Temptations. There was a study that just came out, and actually I was so intrigued by what she said this morning, and what Patricia Seki said this morning. A study just came out on most problems factors for doing business in Sub-Saharan Africa, and one was this is going to be a surprise: access to financing. What's the number one problem for U.S. businesses? Access to finance, access to capital. Inadequate supply and infrastructure. And I was struck, by that. What I actually said, we talked about by 2020, consumerism will be a multi-billion-dollar operation, I do believe. So if you got a consumer product, I would certainly, matter of fact, I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about that this afternoon. I guarantee you that. Other was, we talked about the corruption. And then other that Jimmy mentioned too is insufficient government bureaucracy. You don't know where, and Matt said the same thing, you don't know where the government may stand or what level the government may be in your deal. So those are, because the government could have its hands in a, especially with a state-owned enterprise in it. And then, for example, like Botswana, they have a poor work ethic with the national labor force. And so Botswana has great leather products, but they have a problem with the national labor force, and something that you might run into as well.
So I have a question for you guys. If you're doing business in Africa, how do you go about obtaining the information you need to be successful?
You wait for the cheer. In Ghana, there's the I think it's GIPC. It's the Ghana Information Promotion Group. It's an economic development group that has the basic guidelines. They're very interested in getting people to move into they have some, what's the word? Tax-free zones, but you need to have like a 70% export rate to work through that. But it gives you guidelines on how much capitalization is required for every particular type of business. But again, you're going to be better off not just walking into that office on your own, but walking in there with your African partner that already knows someone there or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo, having a local consultant or a local partner is really, really important. And, thankfully, there's been an increasing amount of market research being done in Africa, and McKinsey just had a really great study, the second round of their Lions on the Move study that came out kind of at a macro level across Africa, but increasingly, like the big markets, there's become a lot more market research becoming available on places like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, et cetera, as well, that can be helpful as well.
Another way you know you're successful, when they won't let you out of the airport. They know you made some money, and they want to get some of that money because people are always being watched, which, that's great. These two gentlemen, what they said, I just piggyback on what they said. Our major deal in Africa was a $6 million deal we did in Angola. And it was medical equipment, hospital supplies. And, but what we learned about that, there were the faction called rebels. And so someone mentioned Exim Bank, and we tried to get Exim Bank involved in the deal, but they thought it was too risky to do for the insurance at that particular time. So we had to actually go out and hire our own paramilitary, if you will, to protect, because when our planes came in, we did a custom broker thing here, shipped them out. We had to actually get an oil tanker out of Houston, Texas, because they fly to Angola every day on the hour. Got things down, but it's set on millions of dollars set on the tarmac of the airport. And the rebels would take that and didn't want to take it to the jungles or sell it or what have you. So we had to actually hire an army, to protect it. And then we talked with President Santos at the time, the president. Like I said, you got to be careful with the level that you mentioned, the government's involvement on the deals too, because things, just end up in different areas. So we got it done. We worked a lot in that deal with the World Health Organization and the United Nations. And for those of us, or those who've got government appointments, work for the government, or have, Levon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You better be transparent with your hands, clean on the table. And so if you get that, then you develop a reputation for being honest integrity. You'll find that some companies just won't even touch you. And that's another mark that you've been successful, believe it or not.
Thank you, guys. Anybody else have a question?
Most of our discussion has been related mostly to a bilateral approach to doing business in Africa. And I was wondering if any of you have had experience in maybe doing business with other partners who frequently or in other economies who frequently do business in Africa, say in the EU, or maybe some of our South American friends are over in China. How does one go about maybe get into the African market with one of those partners?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I'll let you in.
That's a great question. You're back to relationships again. Relationships. Wei Lin is from China. A lot of people don't know this. I was a guest, it's not about me, but I'm going to. I was a guest of Tung Chi Hall, who was the exec for Hong Kong when China went back to communism, or on the handover. And I was the only black American on the yacht. That very day, October 1, 2000, was it 7? No, 1997, South Africa reestablished its diplomatic relationships with China because of what happened back in 1988, 1988 prior to that. And out of that, I met key people and organizations from Africa at that time, in South Africa, that carried over, and through the Chinese. So we've actually worked with Chinese organizations to go into Africa. We've worked with organizations from Costa Rica going into Africa. We worked with Mexican organizations going into Africa, and we've worked with European nations going to Africa. We're doing business in Singapore. So that's a very smart strategy that you just mentioned, and to try to just reach out, and that's what the Wei Lin, the Global Chamber, you reach out something that's bigger than you are. The National Minority Supply Development Council, something that you mentioned earlier this morning, has initiatives. So anyone has initiative, if that initiative matches up with your initiatives, and the value creation it meets your expectation, then it's great. Leverage those, because it'll save you time, money, aggravation, and I can't say this enough, it'll keep you out of a foreign prison.
Yeah, I mean, you might look for European-based multinationals that have operations here in the U.S. that are also focused. So two of our partners are based, one in the Netherlands and one in Switzerland, DSM and Buehler. And honestly, going to this kind of American mindset of thinking we know it all, we don't tap in enough. So Cargill has some limited business interests in Africa. General Mills almost non-existent. Versus Buehler and DSM have long-standing business relationships and offices throughout Africa. But they're the two corporate partners that, because they're not in Minneapolis, where I'm based, versus General Mills and Cargill, their headquarters are there, that we don't have strong enough relationships with. But I was in Nairobi a few months ago meeting with the head of Buehler for East Africa, and he's spent 10 years in Kenya, 10 years in a couple other different markets in Africa, incredibly worldly, and again, approaching business with a much stronger level of humility and understanding of local market context and local cultural context. But both Buehler and DSM also, have operations here, so connecting, with multinationals that might be a little bit closer and have stronger business ties to Africa, particularly European ones, or colonial legacy, relationships, things like that, might be a good way, backdoor through their U.S. operations.
That's excellent. That's excellent what you just said, and thank you. How many of you here ship with UPS or Federal Express? All of you, right? A great way into Africa is Federal Express or UPS. They have every address of every business or every person that they deliver to. And they have programs, they host seminars at times, partner with them. Jimmy just said that. How many here may have a corporate client? Say Apple might be your corporate client, Facebook, or you have relationships. The global supply chain, that's what he just referred to. That's excellent. And those are excellent ways to kind of enter into a market that can kind of save you dollars and cents on, and going won't cost you a lot. Foreign direct investment was mentioned this morning. We're involved in FDI. take some money, say you want to go invest in the market. It opens up. That's where AGOA comes back in. These free trade agreements come back in, and the work done on the President's Council for Africa comes back in. Is that these free trade agreements, ladies and gentlemen, levels the playing field and eliminates barriers so you can get in. It gives you market access so you can get in. Reduces regulations so you can get in. Reduces taxes so you can get in. So that's the importance of these free trade agreements, and how they can help, make it easy for SMEs, small medium-sized enterprises, to get into these markets a little bit quicker and easier. But Jimmy's point is probably one of the best I've ever heard.
This question is for Jimmy. I just wanted to follow up on DSM. I know they did wanted to do a big investment in Rwanda, and then following one in Ethiopia, and I was just wondering how those are going.
I'm aware of those deals, and actually one in Ethiopia. There's an interesting potential deal going on with actually one of our clients that we've helped to grow, and a couple other clients. So, we haven't seen too many opportunities for commercial collaborations between our entrepreneurial clients and our big multinationals. But with DSM and those deals, it's starting to get closer, where the entrepreneurs and food processors that we're working with are growing, based off of the experiences of our corporate partner employees that are gaining market insights in Africa and doing different projects and gaining better understanding of Africa. They're getting closer towards doing more commercial collaboration. So I know they're about to announce another one in Ethiopia. I don't know personally kind of how the Rwandan one is going, but I know there's a deal at least in the making between one of our clients in Ethiopia and DSM that we're really, really excited about as well. And I mean, for me personally and for PFS, if we can help entrepreneurs grow their business to the point, like help them overcome business challenges, technical challenges, to the point that they become an attractive market entry partner for one of our corporate partners, awesome. I think that's a great sign of success, and that we've created that many jobs through the process, created that much more demand for smallholder farmers, et cetera. The other example that I would give of commercial collaborations right now is there's Hershey is one of our partners, and they took us to West Africa because they were interested in strengthening their cocoa supply chain. And so, for the most part, we're not working with exporters. We're working with companies that are delivering food to local markets to help feed people, et cetera, or deliver more nutritious foods. But we do have one company in Ghana that's producing some food for local market, but also has an export component of her business. And we had the head of supply chain for Hershey visiting with us in Ghana, and she happened to be so this female entrepreneur happened to be at the table with the head of supply chain, and she was talking through the challenges of her business, which was, I need a market for the cocoa that I'm producing and the cocoa liquor that I'm producing, and to help fund my local operations to deliver more food to local consumers. And the head of supply chain for Hershey was like, well, my guy that's our head purchaser for cocoa is right next to me, so you guys should talk. So we'd love to see more of those. And I'm sorry I can't speak in more detail to your question about DSM's work in Rwanda and Ethiopia.
I appreciate it. The other question was, do you do, I don't know how small of entrepreneurs you work with, but do you work with any that do post-harvest processing, like right on site, right in the village level before it gets sent to the...
For the most part, no. Okay. We do some like ag processing value addition, but more like closer to the farmers. Some fresh produce for exports. It's relatively rare. But really our sweet spot is more flour milling, dairy production, snacks, cereals, breads, bakeries, et cetera. And then we're not working with startups quite as much. It's more at least $50 to $100,000 in revenue a year, but really probably more like 200,000 minimum up to a few million. Just because, I mean, you think about a company like General Mills or a company like Cargill, et cetera, they don't know startup. They know process, they know scale, they know structure, and there's going to be limited ways for them to work with a startup that's just at the very start. But if you've proven your business model and are starting to add structure and process to your organizations and ready to make that leap, there's a lot that our multinational partners can offer to help enable scale of those businesses.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question about actually starting up a business in the countries that you cover or worked in. You're all familiar with the World Bank report that ranks countries by doing business, and I was just wondering if you could walk through. That report's usually so high level, it's hard to really understand what the process is to first start a business and get it all the way to where you're actually conducting business. So I was wondering if you'd give examples of how this works and where you see maybe regulatory reform in the countries you work in could help.
World Bank just put out a new update report. Is that the ones on doing business in the country, around the country talking about?
Ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business?
Ease of doing business.
Yeah, and it's also tied into the State Department as well. They do a great job, on the ground. But if you're just starting a business, my advice would be it'd probably scare you off a little bit, and I would go back again to your local Export Assistance Center. They have a great U.S. Department of Commerce. They have just a plethora of resources and advice that could really help you. Those kind of statistics and numbers, if you don't know what you're really looking at, will kind of scare you off. Unless now you might be an expert. I'm not saying that you're not, but I'd probably start with a more basic foundation. And now you use those numbers. Some things I just cited was from that report. But unless you know what you're looking at, you may interpret it one way when it's actually meant to mean something else. But I'd go back to the local Department of Commerce, your local U.S. Export Center, Small Business Administration. Eric, I don't know if Eric's still here or not. Your local Small Business Administration has an international department as well. And I would access just some of those resources. It's free, it's a little time, and they can break it down. And I said that they've got access to data and information that just won't necessarily be put out. There's a couple websites you can go to, a little simpler. Export.gov was one, and then trade.gov is another. And those kind of give you some basics and starting out looking at, because I always say this, people are experts. You're starting out, for example, an idea, I know you're an expert at what you do, or else you wouldn't be starting a business. To me, that's just a given. But it's just, start looking at the statistics and numbers. Sometimes they can be confusing and mean one thing and can be interpreted another way. But for us, since we're in over 70 countries and I have people all over the world, then we can take that information and use it another kind of way, and different kind of way, and make it. But we can also make those numbers work for us too. We know how to make them to make them work. Be very kind with you to make them work for us. But that would be my advice if it was just a brand new business starting out. You have the technical expertise. You have the knowledge and what you're doing. I mean, you're the pro. But sometimes numbers can get you a little crazy here.
Yeah, I mean, I could only really speak anecdotally, but I mean, the markets that I hear about that have been working towards reform and making it easier would be Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana, Senegal, and Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire.
In any of those countries, it's not going to be like it is in Indiana, and you go to the indiana.gov and do a search, and you you put your number in and you're done. I mean, you've got to work with these bureaucratic organizations that have files in, with paper, and you got to go from one to the other, and you generally will have to go to multiple departments of a particular organization to get it done. And again, I found that it's always better to have your African partner with you. You know, if you just walk in yourself, then you're gonna wait a long time.
And even in a market that's a bit more advanced, like Kenya, for example, where Nairobi is growing very fast. An entrepreneur was telling me recently that to license his business, he had to get 8 different licenses. So from the city, from the county, from the federal, going all for the exact same purpose. So the regulatory challenges are real.
Sorry, I just wanted to sort of comment and question. One is that we have done some studies on your question, and at least Rwanda, it works there pretty well in terms of using the ease of doing business type of thing, and it's worked well enough that I wanted to do some studies on that and suggest that to Liberians to look at that in terms of getting rid of some of the regulatory hurdles. But I wanted to I don't know whether this is a question or comment, but I was thinking, I'm happy that we're having this conference and looking at the question you asked about with other partners particularly. And I remember somewhere reading before that for a long time, Africa, especially after the Cold War period, for a while there, they became marginalized. And really, with the informal economy, lots of people thought there was really nothing you could get out of it. And then with the Chinese and the Indian investments, and then the explosion in cell phones and technologies and whatnot, it really was surprising the amount of money, the billions of dollars that was made. And what became seemingly obvious is that really the West and the United States didn't know how to do business in Africa, and other people did. Can you comment on that?
I'll just generally agree with you. You know, we looked at Africa as a continent instead of individual countries, like it was mentioned earlier this morning, and we kind of missed the boat. And I think part of it is, like Jimmy had mentioned also, and Toby, on a little bit of arrogance, I think, and fear, but there's still great opportunity there. But yeah, I mean, they've leapfrogged, many years and generations. Just, they went from landline to cell phones, and the landlines were only in the businesses, so the individuals never had that landline, and now the connection to the world through the internet. But their technology, I mean, this next growth is going to be huge. I was with an investment banker a couple weeks ago in Ghana, and he said that they feel like that Ghana, for example, is 20 years behind Eastern Europe. And so that might tell us something there.
Dr. Donald, great question, and I know you're a noted scholar for Sagamore Institute. Asked me this morning, I was the guest of Cyril Ramaphosa. Anybody know who Cyril Ramaphosa is? I was his guest, their guest for the World Cup. And so I was to be sitting in the seat. You saw President Clinton and former Secretary Colin Powell. I was supposed to be sitting in that seat, but the plane missed me. And so I ended up getting here because his nephew, there was a death in the family, and I didn't get to get over. But in the conversation I had with him, and he's from the old ANC, I'm sorry, the old ANC, and he's the chairman of MTS. And MTS is the mobile cell phone company that you're talking about. They're huge throughout Europe, Dubai, of course Africa, throughout the Middle East. And something he told me, just exactly what you said, he said, Oh, you Americans, you're so arrogant. You think you know everything. Now, keep in mind, Africans could be very arrogant themselves. So I'm like, okay, I'm in your house, so I'm gonna be cool. But your point is right, and they ran with it because we didn't think for some reason, as Jimmy will say, and I'm sorry, Dave will say, mine's going a million miles an hour here because your mission work. I was thinking about Will there. That they think that we underestimate their intelligence. And that's a very, very costly and erroneous mistake to make.
Okay, thank you. I want to address something here I didn't mention on my presentation this morning. It was a great challenge. The challenge is to find the appropriate business partner. This is both sides. Sometimes you go to Africa, you hope to find a partner, but you don't, and you come back to America, and vice versa. In my organization, every year here in America, I bring 100 women in America in every field of activities. But sometimes, most of them don't find the appropriate partner. And I really thank the Kelly School of International Business for this conference, because this is a platform with the appropriate audience for that. And I will be more happy for the next conference to join you and bring all those women here in Indianapolis, because we have been doing this in Washington, D.C. area for 7 years. Now we can think otherwise. We can do something different, things different, so that we can have more results on that. So I really thank you for having me here. I really thank you for what you're doing. And also, Dr. Malaka, you said in Africa there is a king in a jungle. But I can say that beside the king, you have queen. So, and in Africa, you know,
Happy Mother's Day.
women are those who are deciding. Because when you go to see the king will say, okay, I will give you an answer tomorrow. Because in the night, he will be talking to the queen. You see? So I will be more happy to bring those queens here, maybe next year, so that we can, find solutions together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The African business women's leaders of all Africa is a client of ours. So thank you for that reminding me. I'd be in big trouble. Thank you.
All right, so I see our time for the afternoon session is up. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their comments this afternoon. And also remind everybody to please fill out the evaluation survey on the table before you leave today. Definitely appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine for closing remarks.
Thank you. So everyone, we'd like to thank you very, very much for spending the day with us. We hope that you learned a little bit. I think you probably learned a lot. I know I learned a lot. But again, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our partners. This was definitely a collaborative effort, and special thank you to Vicki Dixon, who did the majority of the heavy lifting on this event. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a great weekend.